We're in a big war. And I'll say one thing about, because I think it's important. The last person, I did it early, but I was the last person that wanted to close down one of the great economic, you can't call it an experiment, but everything, I guess, in life is an experiment. So I'd say experiments, but one of the great economic stories in history. I'm the last person that wanted to do it, but we did the right thing. Because if we didn't do it, you would have had 1 million people, 1.5 million people, maybe 2 million people dead. Now we're going toward 50, I'm hearing, or 60,000 people. One is too many, I always say it. One is too many. But we're going toward 50 or 60,000 people. That's at the lower, as you know, the low number was supposed to be 100,000 people. We could end up at 50 to 60. Okay, it's horrible. If we didn't do what we did, we would have had, I think, 1 million people, maybe 2 million people, maybe more than that. And you look at, there's one country in particular that decided, let's wing it, let's just keep going. They are being inundated with death. Now, if you take a look at some of the hospitals where, one of them I knew growing up in Queens, and I'm looking at the bodies laying in hallways, being brought into refrigerated trucks, these massive trucks, bodies going in. Multiply that times 10. It's not sustainable. And many of the people that have this theory, oh, let's, maybe we could have just gone right through it. I was somebody that would have loved to have done that, but it wouldn't have been sustainable. You can't lose 1 million people. That's almost double what we lost in the Civil War. I use that as a guide. Civil War, 600,000 people died. So it's not sustainable, but it could have been much more than 1 million people. I mean, if you took a number and cut it in half and half and in half again, you'd end up at 500,000 people. Okay, if you want to make a very conservative guesstimate, 500,000 people is not acceptable. Is that a correct sort of an analogy? So, I mean, I see it all the time by friends of mine, by people that I have great respect for. Well, we could have done this, we could have done. And remember this, when we say 50 and they compare 50 to the 35 of the flu, because it averaged 35, 36,000 over a 10-year period, it's a lot. Who would think that? But we're not talking about with the flu, it just goes. We're not locking ourselves in our units. We're not locking ourselves in our apartments and not moving and not touching anybody and just saying, the world. In this case, we are. And we're still going to lose between 50 and 60. But if we just kept it going on a normal basis, which is really the only standard that you can compare it to with the flu, because that was a normal basis. You get into an airplane, you travel to Florida, you go to Texas, you go wherever you're going. But in this case, if we didn't do anything, the number wouldn't be 50 to 60,000. The number would be 1 million people dead. It would be 1.5 million, 1.2 million, maybe 700,000. It would have been a number in like that because and it's so important because I see so much, oh, well, you can't compare it. Because I'll tell you what, the people of this country, what they've done, they've gone out of what they had, the way they've lived, it's not great, it's terrible. Maybe the first 3 days, and then all of a sudden, you see what's going on. They want to get going. And I get that fully, but I just say this. If we would have done that, we would have lost anywhere from 1 million to more than 2 million people. Now, with all of the death that we've seen at 50 or 60,000 people heading toward, right now it's at 40, but 50 or 60,000 people, probably over 50 for what I see, but that's with our guard up. If we took our guard down and just said, okay, we're just going to keep this open, we would have lost millions of people. Can you imagine? Look how bad it looks now when you look at the bodies, when you look at Hart Island in New York where they have the mass grave and all of the things that you see. Can you imagine if we had the guard down, if we didn't do anything and we just said, let's ride it out? It would not have been sustainable in any way. It would have been an atrocity. So we've done the right thing. We've really done the right thing. And the people that have worked so hard and dangerously, I'll tell you, again, I say it, but I watch those doctors and nurses and medical people running into those hospitals, and they don't even have their gear on. Forget about gear, whether it's great gear or not, and we're bringing in the best gear in the world. But they're running in with open everything, and they're the job. They're like warriors, the job they're doing. But if we didn't do the moves that we made, you would have had 1 million, 1.5 million, 2 million people dead. So multiply that times 50. You're talking about you would have had 10 to 20 to 25 times more people dead than all of the people that we've been watching. That's not acceptable. The 50,000 is not acceptable. It's so horrible. But can you imagine multiplying that out by 20 or more? It's not acceptable. So it's a very good question. I appreciate it. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow.